Welcome back to DSR. I'm Bruce, and we are covering the Unearthed Arcana from September that just came out, and we're covering the Enchanter subclass for Wizard. Starting off, there's some of the flavor text, which is helpful, and then the design notes. First up, the Hypnotic Presence feature replaces Vexing Movement and has been redesigned to use concentration, freeing up your actions on subsequent turns. Then Split Enchantment is available at an earlier level. Then Instinctive Charm returns and is redesigned to turn a hit against you into a miss with the potential to redirect the attack to a new target. And lastly, Alter Memories returns and has been redesigned to allow Modify Memory to target multiple creatures. And it's important to call out that while they noted it, I just want to make sure it's very clear, Instinctive Charm and Split Enchantment have swapped places in your leveling. So in the 2014 Player's Handbook and in the June UA, Instinctive Charm was, and its equivalent was level 6, and Split Enchantment was level 10, and now those swap places. So Split Enchantment is now level 6, and Instinctive Charm is now level 10 in the September UA. And we're going to cover it in order as it appears in the September UA, but I just want to call that out, try to make it a little more clear. So first, Enchantment Savant. This is the same thing every Wizard subclass that is a school specialist gets, and it's the same template. The only thing that swaps is the name of the school there, so you can see it just says enchantment instead of a different spell school. Works the same. It's better than it was. I think it's still a missed opportunity. Could have been better used for more, had more effects or features added to encourage you to make these wizard school specialists want to cast the spells from their school spell more. But there's no point in talking about it because the paradigm is already baked and released in the 2024 Player's Handbook for the 4 subclasses there. So it's not going to change. So let's move on. And now a new feature that didn't have any equivalent in the 2014 Player's Handbook, but did appear in the June UA and is reprinted here in the September UA, and they're identical, so I'm just going to show it once. But it says you gain 1 proficiency in Deception, and you can choose Deception, Intimidation, or Persuasion. In addition, when you make an ability check with the chosen skill, you gain a bonus to the check equal to your Intelligence modifier, minimum of +1. So that's great. I think this is the kind of thing that the Enchanter should have always had. I love it, or I love that they've added this. But let's compare this to, say, the Fey Wanderer Ranger that gets a very similar feature, except the Fey Wanderer Ranger gets a better feature. So the Fey Wanderer Ranger gets a bonus to any charisma check equal to their wisdom modifier, and then they gain proficiency in 1 social skill. So both of these are getting proficiency in 1 social skill, but the Fey Wanderer Ranger is getting their wisdom modifier, which is one of their primary ability scores, added to every charisma check, whereas the Enchanter is only getting their intelligence modifier, which is their primary ability score, added to 1 of the social skill ability checks. And frankly, I think the Enchanter should be better at this than the Fey Wanderer Ranger. I definitely think they should give this modifier enhancement on any charisma check, and I would include insight checks. The Enchanter is kind of like the psychologist, I guess, of D&D. They've studied how the mind works. They know how it functions. They have greater insight into what your behavior means about your personality and your goals. So they would know when you're lying more. They would know, what your bonds and ideals are more. They would be able to read that. And so they should get that as well. And yeah, that's what I would do. I think that this is going in the right direction. It's not nearly enough unless they give it the bonus to every charisma check, not just 1 skill. And moving on to the next feature, in the 2014 Player's Handbook, it was Hypnotic Gaze, which was interesting, kind of limited use, but it was interesting. The UA in June changed it to Vexing Movement, which was also interesting. I get what they were going for with this idea of the Vexing Movement. I think a lot of people are hung up on why is the Enchanter suddenly good at movement. But I think what they were actually going for was this effect that you saw, like the Scarlet Witch in Avengers Age of Ultron, where she was messing with Bruce Banner's head or Tony Stark's head. She would suddenly appear, be manipulating their mind, and then suddenly disappear, and they couldn't see her anymore. And I think they were trying to replicate that with this feature. and I think a lot of people didn't get the idea of the flavor. I thought it was fine and made sense, and it was all right. I thought it was fine. Was it better than Hypnotic Gaze? Hard to say. It would, not very often are you going to be right next to somebody when you cast an enchantment spell and then need to dash and disengage. So yeah, I'm not sure it would have been better or it would have been very useful. So it was fine. But let's move on to see what they've got here in the September UA. This one is Hypnotic Presence. So they've gone back to the hypnotic idea, changed it a little bit. So give it a 10-foot distance instead of 5 feet, which is a big improvement. Because 5 feet, if you walk up adjacent to an enemy and you're a wizard, you're putting yourself at risk, right? And if it fails, then you're now stuck in melee range and you might get clobbered. So just giving you that extra 5 feet, so now it's 10 feet, and that way if it fails, you can still have a good chance of getting away without getting, a bunch of opportunity attacks. Now, if the monster has a reach of 10, you're still in trouble. So that's a little better. And we'll leave that at that. So the next part is the duration, right? So in the player's handbook, it had a duration of really 1 round, or a little bit more than a round, because it was the end of your next turn. And in the September UA, it's now 1 minute, but now uses your concentration. And that is a huge downgrade. In fact, I think that one change right there, the fact that it uses your concentration, makes this a completely useless feature. And I'll cover that more in just a sec. Let's hit this last little bit where it gives limitations on how often it can be used and things like that. So in the 2014 Player's Handbook, there was no limitation on how much you used it. The limitation was on, could you use it on the same creature again? So once a creature succeeded at its saving throw against this, you couldn't use this on that same creature again until you finish a long rest. So you could use it infinitely as long as it wasn't the same target. Now in the September UA, they've gotten rid of that restriction entirely, and now it just has a limitation on how many times you can use this ability, and it's once per long rest, and then you can expend a spell slot to use it again, which is much worse. So they've really, in 2 very significant ways, so in 1 small way they've improved it, kind of a small improvement, and in 2 very big ways they've nerfed this. So let's dig into that. First off, there are 23 wizard enchantment spells that are on the core, that are in the core rules. 13 of them require concentration. So right then you've eliminated 13 of your enchanter wizard enchantment spells that you would have used, because you're now using your concentration to concentrate on this hypnotic presence effect. And let's look at what the 10 remaining spells are that you can cast that don't require concentration, that are enchantment spells, which is your enchanter, right? So if you're leaning into being an enchanter, these are the spells you have left if you're using your concentration. You got Mind Sliver, which is decent. I see it used pretty often. It's one of the top cantrips that gets used, just because it imposes an intelligence saving throw, which is a good one to target. And then the penalty to the next save is a good effect. So I see this one getting used decently often as far as cantrips go. Then your next spell that you have from the Wizard Enchantment School list is Charm Person. And I have never seen a player cast that. And I've played with 200 to 300 different players over the last, 5 years, about 10,000 hours DMing for these players. And never once have I seen a player cast this spell in combat or out of combat. And then you don't have any 2nd and 3rd level non-concentration wizard enchantment spells. Then you've got 4th level with Charm Monster. Once again, I've never seen a player ever cast the spell. And I'm not saying players don't do it. I'm not talking about what might happen in the whole community. I'm just talking about my firsthand experience with these 200 to 300 players, 10,000 hours DMing. Never seen this cast. And then we move on to 5th level with Geish. Never seen a player cast that. I've seen a player take that spell before and try to cast it, but they tried to do it in the middle of combat, didn't read all the details of the spell, and missed that it was a 1 minute cast time, which would be 10 rounds of combat. So they ended up not casting it because they just didn't understand how the spell worked. But Synaptic Static, I see that one used pretty often. Whenever there's a player who can get this at 5th level, when they're at 9th level and get this 5th level spell, they usually take it and start using it. And this one gets used pretty often. Mass Suggestion, I don't think I've ever seen that one used, even though it's supposed to be a really good spell. Community always talks about it being a good spell. I just don't see Suggestion and Mass Suggestion used very often. I've seen Suggestion cast twice, and I've never seen Mass Suggestion cast in all of my firsthand experience. All right, why don't these spells get used as much? What do I mean by there's too many restrictions and you're punished for trying to use them in combat? Let's look at 2 examples. There's a number of enchantment spells that have these kind of restrictions. We're just going to look at 2 because I don't want to clutter up the screen too much, and we don't need to go over every single example of this. First off, spells like this, when they end, the target knows it was charmed by you. Now, the DM has to decide how's that NPC going to respond, and what does this mean? But at the very least, it's not a good thing, right? They might turn hostile. Maybe that means they start combat with you. Maybe it just means, other social encounter type implications. They won't help you anymore, or they're going to raise their prices on you. So that's one big penalty for trying to use these charm-like spells. The next one is you're punished for trying to use it in combat. Right? So you see, if you're like the friends cantrip, if you're fighting it or your allies are fighting it, they are just immune. They automatically succeed on the save. With the charm person spell, if you're fighting it in combat with it, it gets advantage on the save. So you're punished for trying to use this in combat. And there's one other reason that these spells are not used, and that is if you look up at their components, they have components that can be noticed. So if you try to use these even in a social encounter, which is what they're meant for, which is why they have so many restrictions and punishments if you try to use it in combat, even if you try to use this in a social encounter, people are going to see you casting this spell. So they're kind of hard to use in social encounters too, which is the main thing they're meant for. So that's all the problems with these spells, and you should definitely not be giving a spell full caster class a feature that requires their concentration. That's terrible. If they just went back to the old hypnotic gaze, that would be a lot better. Just even with a 5-foot range, it would be a lot better. But even more so, I think they should go for something else entirely. What is the number one problem that evocation spells have, right? If you're going to be an evoker, you are leaning into this AoE damage, right? You're blasting area damage spells, hitting a bunch of creatures, and the evocation school or the evoker subclass solves that problem by, at 6th level now, giving you the feature that you can avoid friendly fire. Friendly fire was the number one problem with AoE spells, and being the evoker solves that one problem for you so that you're more likely to cast your evocation spells, right? And I think that's what every one of these school specialist subclasses should do. They should solve the biggest problems and pain points with these spells that are of that school so that you're more likely to cast them more often. And so this is what I would suggest for the Enchanter, right? These are the issues with the enchantment spells. First, and I would just give them all of these features at 3rd level. Get rid of Hypnotic Gaze, forget that whole thing. Just do this. Make every wizard enchantment spell they cast subtle spell. So it doesn't have verbal and somatic components. It just has material if the spell actually has a material component so that people don't just automatically see you casting a spell in their face. Second, I would, for the Enchanter, right? This is a feature we're adding just the Enchanter feature class would then say it removes the penalty that when the spell ends, the target knows it was charmed by you. Now, in the 2014 Player's Handbook version, they gave this to you at the 14th level. I think they should give it to you at 3rd level, right up front, so that you are more likely to be casting Charm Person, which is probably the most iconic spell that an Enchanter should cast, and yet they never cast it because there's so many restrictions. It's actually hard to cast in combat and out of combat, right? Which doesn't make any sense. Okay, next bullet point. I would also give them the feature that says that would remove this condition that says if you're fighting it, whether it makes them immune to the spell or gives them advantage on the save, I would remove that as an Enchanter feature at 3rd level so that they can actually use these things in combat, giving them interesting tactical options with that spell. If they put that spell on their spell list, it's going to feel like just a spell that's just kind of taking up room on their spell list if they can't effectively use it in combat. So this lets them effectively try to use these things in combat. And the last bullet point is allow that when you have a spell, whenever you have a wizard enchantment spell that's going to cause on a failed save the target to be charmed, that you can instead choose an ally to be the charmer instead of yourself, so that you can say, the warrior on the front line, well, I'm casting this enchantment spell, I'm casting charm person, but now the enemies are charmed by that person, by that ally instead of you. Kind of like the Arcane Archer's beguiling shot feature, where you get to choose a different charmer. So these last two bullet points give you interesting tactical options with these charm spells in combat, so that maybe you would actually use these in combat to be messing with people's heads, and it would give effects like protecting an ally who's in trouble, and it just has a decent chance of landing, so they don't have advantage against the save, or they're not immune to it. So that's what I would do. Forget the whole hypnotic gaze thing. Stop trying to make that work. Just do this. Moving on to the next level. So this is level 6 for the UA September version. And remember, they swapped the places with the 10th level feature. So you're going to see this being compared to the June and 2014 Players Handbook versions, and it's going to say 10th level on those. But for the September UA, it's 6th level. Okay. And between the 2014 Players Handbook and the June UA, all they did was change it. They kept the feature the same. It's infinite use. And all they did was change it from the format of the design format that they used for Twin Spell in 2014 to the format they're using for Twin Spell in 2024 now. So that's the only thing they've changed. Now, it does function mechanically differently, but they're just changing to follow that model. So makes sense. I think that's fine. Would have been great. With the September UA, though, they moved it to 6th level, which is great. I think that they needed to move this forward, but then they added a limitation on the number of uses equal to your intelligence modifier per long rest. Is that, that's okay. I don't know how many times you're going to need to use this, and that might be enough. It might feel like a small restriction, but since your intelligence ability score is your primary ability score, this isn't going to hamper you that much. But I just think it's unnecessary, right? This whole subclass is pretty weak, and putting a limitation on their best feature, which I think from what they've produced, this is their best feature, and putting a limitation on their best feature is just too much, right? This was already a weak subclass, and limiting that makes them even weaker. So I think they should remove that limitation, even though they moved it to 6th level. Now we're going to go to 10th level for the September UA, which is going to be compared to 6th level features from the previous printings because they swapped them. All right, so with the June UA, they changed it from this instinctive charm feature into a reflecting charm. On the defensive side, they basically made it exactly the same as Uncanny Dodge that the rogues have. So it's really just Uncanny Dodge. But they added something to it, which is if you're going to use this feature, it takes your reaction, then they get a wisdom saving throw, and on a fail, they take psychic damage equal to half your wizard level plus your intelligence modifier. You only get to use this once. If you want to use it more than once per long rest, you have to expend a 2nd level spell slot. This was really pretty weak. Yeah, quite weak. But we don't need to talk about it because they gave up on that idea and went back to the instinctive charm idea. So they moved this to 10th level, and they changed a few things. First of all, in the September UA version, they changed it so that it only triggers when you are hit by an attack roll. So it's after the attack roll hits you. In the 2014 version, you had to declare it after they targeted you, but before the attack roll was made. And they explicitly restated that at the end of the feature in 2014, right? So they've gotten rid of that and actually made it much better in that it has to hit you first. So that's good. That's much better. And then the second part they changed, they changed this wording on when you redirect the attack, right? So somebody hits you with an attack roll, and you can redirect that, use your reaction to redirect it to hit somebody else. They changed the language on the restrictions and conditions on who was targeted by that attack, but they made it a lot better in your favor. And if there are multiple who qualify, you get to choose. In the 2014 version, the creature that you did this to, it chose which target to hit if there were multiple that qualified, right? And frankly, that meant it was always going to be one of your allies. So it kind of turned this into a useless feature, because if they're going to attack you, then you would redirect it, and you're a back row person. There is definitely people closer than you. Definitely allies closer than you, and enemies closer than you. And if the creature who's making the attack gets to choose, they're definitely going to choose one of your allies, not one of their allies. So that kind of made this instinctive charm in the 2014 version useless. I guess all it did was if you're not going to get hit, an ally is going to get hit instead. That's basically what it came down to. Now they changed it in the 2025 September UA, where you get to choose. If there are multiple creatures who qualify, you choose who gets attacked. So that's, again, a lot better. Not only is this meaning you don't get hit, it's going to punish them by having the creature that initiated attack target one of their allies. Now, if they don't have any allies, it's still going to hit your ally, I guess, if there's no one in range. So there's you've killed all the minions and it's just the big bad guy left. Well, it's still going to hit one of your allies, but I guess it's at least not you. But if there are minions, you're going to have the boss clobber one of his minions, which is great. And lastly, they put a restriction on number of uses. So you get to use this once per long rest, but it's restored when you cast any enchantment spell with a spell slot. So this is kind of like the 2014 version of the Conjurer's benign transposition feature, where you get to use it once, but it recharges whenever you cast any conjuration spell. So I do like that, and I think that overall this feature is a lot better than it used to be. Is it still a great feature? I'm not sure. It uses your reaction, and it only triggers when you are hit by an attack roll. And frankly, as an enchanter, depending on how you built your character, but if you went straight enchanter, all right, you're probably have no frontline features. You probably have poor defenses. You shouldn't be on the front line. Part of your job is to just not be targeted. You're trying to stand as far back as you can. You're trying to hide around corners, hiding behind allies, things like that. So you don't even want to be targeted anyway. So, and the less you're targeted, the less this is going to happen. So, you might have this occur once per session, maybe. It depends on a lot of factors and how DMs run things. So it's just not going to trigger that often. But when it does, this is going to be useful. And then you're going to be able to easily restore it by casting another enchantment spell. I do like that they changed this to encourage you to want to cast more enchantment spells. I love seeing those kind of features in these specialist school subclasses like this. I just don't think you're going to need it more than like once a session. It's just not going to happen that often. So it's much better. Still not a great feature. All right, and now we're moving on to the subclass Capstone, which in 2014 was called Alter Memories. In the June UA, it was called Bolstering Belief. So they really completely redesigned it and made it this big kind of support feature where you got Power Word Fortify, which wizards don't normally get access to, and made, even gave additional buffs on top of having that spell that you could cast, and it would buff your allies even more, not just the temporary hit points, but they had advantage on saving throws to end or avoid the charmed and frightened conditions. So that was interesting. And it was powerful. So I think that was a powerful feature. And if they left it like that, I don't think I'd complain. It is confusing because that is a strong kind of support feature. And the Enchanter, up till this point, unless you've multi-classed, is not really a support character. They're a strong controller. Hopefully they've got, I think part of the fantasy is being a good face for the party, face role. But until the UAs, they didn't have any face features. So yeah, you've been like this controller up until this point in your career, and all of a sudden you get this big support feature. Well, since you were never a support character before, there was a good chance that somebody else in your party already was a strong support, was filling the support role, and had maybe even already had this exact spell. So you're getting your capstone, and you're likely to feel like, oh well, my capstone didn't feel that great because somebody else is already better at this whole thing than I am anyway. So I think it was going to be a feel bad moment for the Enchanter. So I'm glad that they went back and redesigned this again for September. So let's focus on the Player's Handbook versus the September UA. So the Player's Handbook, it was a feature called Alter Memory. So it has the same name, but the way it worked, it gave 2 rider effects on top of any enchantment spell you cast that inflicted the charmed condition. So it's not any enchantment spell. It's only enchantment spells that also inflict the charm condition, which is not all of them, but like half of them-ish inflict a charm condition. So this was just adding 2 riders on any enchantment spell you cast, which was interesting and kind of useful. So the first rider was that and this is what I mentioned earlier, that they are not aware of being charmed by you, right? So when I was talking about their 3rd level features, I referenced this, and my suggestion would be to give that to the Enchanter at 3rd level, but apply it only to wizard enchantment spells, not any enchantment spell, so that people wouldn't like dip this and then go back into other things and use strong enchantment spells and features from other classes with this feature. I think you want to limit this to just wizard enchantment spells. Then the second part of the 2014 feature was another writer on top of all your enchantment charm spells. And what this one did was, for the duration of the spell, up to 1 plus your charisma modifier in hours, you could make them forget that period of time. So you didn't actually get to alter their memories, you just made them forget it, which is interesting. And frankly, I can think of a lot of scenarios in which you'd want to do that, right? You're trying to sneak past the town guard, you just cast Charm Person on them, and all of a sudden, not only does Charm Person work, and it can go 24 hours, you can just make them forget from the time you cast a spell, the next 24 hours. And so they have no idea what's going on. They don't know that you snuck up, but they don't know that you came past. And this would actually trigger that kind of effect that you see Scarlet Witch doing in the first half of the Age of Ultron Avengers movie, where once she messes with their minds, they don't remember her being around. They don't remember where she went after that. And I actually think this is a better implementation of how that functioned, right? It's not that she suddenly ran away fast. It's not that she suddenly turned invisible. She made them forget that she was there, made them forget she was running away or moving away after she messed with their minds. So I actually think this was pretty interesting. And I like that it was just a rider added to every one of your enchantment charm spells. The one interesting part of it is that it was the amount of hours that you made them forget is dependent on your charisma modifier. And this is the only thing in the entire class and subclass that benefited from having a higher charisma modifier. So up until before 14th level, there's no positive reason why you'd want a high charisma modifier. And all of a sudden at 14th level, your big capstone feature is dependent on your charisma modifier. And now you're like, oh shoot, I dumped that stat. It was an 8. And now this feature is less strong. Now it still would be 1 hour, even if you had a charisma modifier of -1. And 1 hour is a lot of time. That's plenty of time for you to walk past the guards and walk past several groups of guards, make it in the castle, do whatever you're doing, or sneaking into the enemy's goblins lair, and you're casting this on a bunch of goblins as you go through. 1 hour is plenty of time to do some things, but more time is better, right? So that was interesting. And the UA 2025 version, still called Alter Memories, but what it does is it gives you the Modify Memory spell always prepared, and when you cast it, you can target 2 creatures. So we're going to have to look at that spell to even assess how this compares. So here's the spell, and first off, you can see pretty early on, it's got that same kind of punishment for using this in combat that a lot of enchantment charm spells have. They're going to have advantage if you're in combat with them. So you're disincentivized to use this in combat. If it succeeds or they fail their saving throws against it, they are charmed and also incapacitated. So it gives a pretty strong control effect. It lasts 1 minute and takes your concentration. And the effect is that while this charm lasts, you can affect the target's memory of an event that it experienced within the last 24 hours and that lasted no more than 10 minutes. You can permanently eliminate all memory of the event, allow the target to recall the event with perfect clarity, or change its memory of the event's details, or create a memory of some other event. So you got, for a 10-minute window of its memory, you can completely change, erase, replace, whatever you want, that memory of an event. So this is a little bit interesting because it's different than the 2014 version. The 2014 version essentially functioned going forward. From the time you cast a spell, going forward, you could make them forget things happening after you cast the spell, but not before the spell. With Modify Memory, it's everything up until you cast the spell. So you can affect their memory before the spell, but not after the spell is cast. And I could see you, in different scenarios wanting to do either one, right? I don't know that either one of those is better than the other, except that, definitely in some scenarios you're going to want to affect their memories before you cast a spell, and in other scenarios you're going to want to affect their memories after the spell. And this one is better in the sense that it's not just forget; it also gives you the ability to change it to something else. And you can upcast this. There's a few conditions. The rest of the text is just talking about the conditions in which you can use it and how it works. And how to reconcile conflicts and niche scenarios, and then you can also remove it with remove curse or greater restoration, cast on the creature to restore its true memory. And then you can upcast it, but it doesn't upcast to give you more targets. It upcasts to give you, and it doesn't upcast to give you a longer period of the piece of time you're modifying. It's always the 10-minute piece of their memory that you're modifying. It just gives you upcasting. It just gives you a longer range backwards in time to affect their memory. So if you cast it with a 6th level spell slot, it's 1 week back. And if you cast it with a 7th level spell slot, it's 1 month back. And an 8th level spell slot is 1 year back. And a 9th level spell slot is any point in time in the creature's past, right? So I can see scenarios where you'd want to upcast it that way. That's going to be pretty niche. In fact, this whole spell is pretty niche. And so comparing it to the 2014 Player's Handbook version, I'd say this is a lot weaker, especially since the 2014 Enchanter always had access to this Modify Memory spell. They had access to it. So it's not like you're getting access to something you couldn't have used before. You're just getting a free preparation of it, and you get to target 2 creatures. And so those are the only effects you're getting, both of which are pretty weak. And I think this is definitely a lot weaker than the 2014 version, right? The 2014 version, you're adding these riders onto every enchantment charm spell. This one just giving you a free preparation of a spell you had access to anyway. And frankly, I've never seen a player cast this spell. I've never seen a player prepare this spell. I think it's just too hard to use and too niche in its function. So now you're just getting a free preparation of a very, very niche spell that you would only use out of combat and only in certain, very small circumstances. So not good. Big drop in utility, big drop in functionality, and definitely a big drop in power there. I think they should. Here's what I would suggest. I would give them both. Right. I think both of these features, even though the 2014 one is a lot better, I think they're both not strong. I think they're both. The 2014 is kind of meh, and the September UA is actually bad. So just give them both, right? That gives them this flexibility of we're modifying memory before I cast a spell. We're also modifying memory after I cast a spell. Just give them both features. And then on top of that, give them another feature to make them really feel like, a lot of oomph from hitting their capstone as an enchanter of if a target is already charmed by you, now it has disadvantage on saves against your wizard enchantment spells. Right? Give them a little boost, especially since there are a lot of creatures that have advantage on saves against charm. And then there's a lot of creatures that are just going to be immune to charm, especially at high levels. So, and you might want to even give them something for that, whether you say if they're immune to charm, instead they have advantage on the saving throw against your spell. So you can still try to use your charm spells on them. Otherwise, enchantment specifically, those spells really fall off at high levels, not because of the spells themselves, but because so many creatures are going to have advantage on the save, and even more creatures are going to just be immune to the charm condition entirely, and the charm condition is your bread and butter. So that's what I would do to make this feel like a real capstone. Overall, I think this is a swing and a miss. I think they made it worse. A couple of things are better. Their instinctive charm is better. I think it's unfortunately, I would still probably throw that away and start and do something else entirely, because I think it's too niche of a function. It's just not going to come up often enough to feel good like that was your 10th level feature, and it just isn't used very often. The 3rd level feature where you add your intelligence modifier to 1 social skill is an improvement in the right direction. I think they need to make that a lot better. So those 2 things were a little bit better. They need to go further with those, and then everything else got worse. And so and I don't think it's really leaning into the 2 roles that people would expect out of an enchanter, which is you're going to be good at the party face because you're good at manipulating minds, and you're going to be a good controller. So this doesn't, and wizards are already good controllers. But the enchantment spells that you're focusing on are the ones that fall off because of the enemies' immunities and resistances. So I think that they have not created a good design for this subclass. In fact, I think they even made it worse than the 2014 version. And they got to keep working on this. All right, so that's it. Let me know, if you have different ideas, or you didn't, what things you didn't agree with, or what other better ideas you might have. And thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll see you next time.